Hello and welcome to WION Broadcast from Washington, D.C. I'm Simon Marks. We've got a lot lined up for the next half hour. Let's start by taking a look at the day's top headlines. The much-anticipated bilateral talks between the leaders of Russia and India have begun. The Russian president arrived at the summit venue just a while ago as Prime Minister Modi welcomed him inside after a quick photo op. Ahead for the one-on-one meeting, Prime Minister Modi hailed the India-Russia ties that have seen 2 decades of partnership. Prime Minister Modi called those ties a model of trust. The kind words were reciprocated from the Russian side as well, as President Putin said his country perceives India as a great power, a trusted friend, and the partnership is like no other in the world. India's Defence Minister Rajnath Singh and his Russian counterpart, General Sergei Shoigu, sign a defence pact for the procurement of AK-203 assault rifles and an agreement on military technical cooperation until 2031. And India and Bangladesh mark 50 years of diplomatic ties as the Indian government confirms that President Kovind will travel to Dhaka to participate in the celebrations of the 50th anniversary of the Liberation War. The President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, has arrived in India for a traditional annual summit. It's the second time President Putin is stepping outside of Russia after skipping visits to the G20, the COP26 climate summit in Glasgow, and rescheduling his planned tour of China. Prime Minister Narendra Modi stood outside the summit venue in the national capital to welcome his old friend, President Vladimir Putin. The Russian president arrived with his entourage and stepped out to shake hands with the Indian Prime Minister. The two leaders then walked ahead for a quick photo op before heading in for the much-awaited bilateral talks. Prime Minister Modi then welcomed the president inside the venue as the two leaders sat down for a short press conference, which saw them showering kind words and appreciation upon one another. Reports suggest that at least 10 bilateral agreements are to be signed, aiming to boost the India-Russia strategic partnership. This in-person visit to India highlights the significance Russia places on bilateral ties with its traditional ally, India. This bilateral summit comes despite New Delhi's growing closeness to Washington. According to reports, Russia and India will sign 10 bilateral agreements in various areas, including some semi-confidential ones following the talks. The meeting is also likely to see the presentation of Russia's S-400 air defense system to India. According to reports, the two countries are likely to sign a deal for the supply of AK-203 assault rifles to India. Despite the changing geopolitical equations, Delhi and Moscow have remained closest of allies, but some areas of difference will be difficult to ignore, given the fact that both Russia and India are sliding towards different partners due to the ongoing geopolitical rivalry between the United States and China. A possible clash of ideas regarding the security of the Indo-Pacific region and the re-emergence of the Quad group comprising Australia, Japan the US and India. We are joined now by our correspondent Stuart Smith, WION's man in Moscow. Stuart, thanks very much for being with us today. President Putin has flown down to New Delhi for a few hours to hold this bilateral meeting with Prime Minister Modi. He has skipped major diplomatic summits and other meetings this year because, of course, of the COVID-19 pandemic. What does this signify, the mere fact that he's travelled to Delhi for these talks?
Well, we know that President Putin has received his booster shot, his third dose of the Sputnik V vaccine. So he is slightly more protected than he might have been earlier in the year. But I do think there is more going on than this. We know that the last time these two leaders met in this format was 2019, so it's been a while. And as you said, this geopolitical situation, the seemingly big change in the shift with the India looking towards the United States and Russia looking more towards China, is likely part of it. Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, mentioned this himself. He said that we've witnessed many fundamental changes and different kinds of geopolitical equations are emerging, but this friendship of India and Russia remains constant. And the Foreign Minister of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, when discussing the purchase by India of the S-400 missile system, did explicitly address this idea as well, that he says India is showing, it is making clear it is a sovereign country by agreeing to this purchase with the potential of US sanctions on the back of it, and that it's more than just a symbolic message. India will be able to make good use of these air defense missiles in India. The problem for India is that the implication with India buying these missiles from Russia is that China could become unhappy. China and India have strained relations recently, whereas Russia is looking for closer relations with China.
Stuart, let's just dig into that a bit more, because India is continuing to engage with Russia for defence supplies. I mean, the S-400 alone sparks the real risk of American sanctions or at least American disapproval. What's the Kremlin's view on all of that?
Well, I couldn't quite catch you there, but in terms of the other issues they may be looking at, we know there are 10 deals to be signed overnight in India, and many of these relate to trade and investment. But we're also looking at space cooperation, such as dealing with both respective countries having global positioning systems in each other's countries for their own global positioning systems. The contracts looking at cultural agreements between the two nations. And we know that the COVID-19 collaboration between the two nations has been particularly high, with Russia unable to manufacture its own Sputnik V COVID-19 vaccines to the quantity that it needed within the country. And so India has been fundamental in providing hundreds of millions of doses of that Sputnik V vaccine. They're also looking at hydrocarbon trade and export, with Russia providing hydrocarbons to India, potentially from the Arctic continental shelf, which it's keen to exploit. The other final is the contracts around economic investment, which President Putin directly referenced, saying that bilateral trade between the two nations has risen by 38% over the last year.
An interesting balance sheet developing. Stuart Smith, WION's reporter in Moscow. Thank you very much indeed for that. Also joining us today from Moscow is Alexei Zakharov. He is a research fellow at the School of International Affairs at Moscow's Higher School of Economics. Mr. Zakharov, thanks to you as well for being on the programme today. Looking at the geopolitical landscape and the new conflicts that are kind of dominating that landscape, how do you see the future of the Indian-Russia relationship?
Good evening. Well, first of all, given the geopolitical uncertainties going on in the world, I think it's essential for Russia and India to keep together and to try to develop this relationship. And I think that the visit by Vladimir Putin is aimed actually at keeping this relationship afloat and at showing that India is still a very important partner for Russia, especially given its difficult relationship with the West.
And how does Russia view India's engagement with the United States and its allies? Is the Kremlin to any extent trying to drive a bit of a wedge between India and the United States here by deepening Russia's ties with India at the beginning of a week, of course, that is going to see President Biden hosting his Summit of Democracies just on Thursday?
Well, of course, the India-US rapprochement has been a point of concern for Russia, especially in terms of, US as a competitor in Indian defense market. We have seen that the US share of exports to India has been growing, while the Russian share, has been kind of fluctuating, even with some periods of decrease. And of course, I think that Russian officials are sensitive to this. Another point of concern is a kind of political affinity between India and the United States. Their closeness on different topics, like on the Indo-Pacific, which is Russia wary of. But I think that Russia should understand that India has its own set of bilateral relationships, and the US is an important partner for India, not only geopolitically or not only security reasons. It's also important in terms of a burgeoning economic partnership between the two countries. That's why I think that Russian officialdom should understand is that India is naturally interested in pursuing its own relationship with the United States that does not intervene in its relations with Russia.
We're at the beginning of a very interesting week. Alexei Zakharov, live from Moscow. Thanks so much for your time today. I hope we'll talk to you again soon. Now, strengthening the time-tested ties between the two countries, the Foreign and Defence Secretaries of India and Russia held an inaugural 2+2 dialogue today. The talks that lasted for over 2 hours came just before the annual India-Russia summit. India's Defence Minister Rajnath Singh said he appreciated Russia's strong support for India. He said that close cooperation between the two countries will bring peace, prosperity and stability in the region. The Defence Minister termed Russia as India's long-standing and privileged strategic partner. The Russian Defence Minister Sergei Shoigu responded by saying that he hoped the two countries will together enhance regional security.
India-Russia defence engagements progressed in an unprecedented manner in recent times. We hope that Russia will remain a major partner for India in these challenging circumstances.
Russia-India defence cooperation is important for the relations between our two countries during these times. I am confident that Russia and India will help in enhancing regional security.
India and Russia signed 4 agreements, including a contract for the procurement of over 600,000 AK-203 assault rifles. An agreement on military and technical cooperation for the next 10 years was also signed by the two defence ministers. Before the 2+2 dialogue, the foreign and defence ministers of both countries held a one-on-one bilateral meeting where they stressed the importance of the strategic partnership between the two countries. Defence Minister Rajnath Singh and his Russian counterpart Sergei Shoigu also co-chaired a session of the Intergovernment Commission on Military Technical Cooperation. India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar said they will discuss the consequences of over-centralised globalisation and terrorism, among other things. The Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said both countries share a similar vision of how to maintain peace and security in the world.
Our discussions today will address the emergence of multipolarity and rebalancing. We look too at the consequences of over-centralized globalization. The long-standing challenges remain even as new ones emerge. Prominent among them are terrorism, violent extremism and radicalization. The situation in Afghanistan has wider repercussions, including for Central Asia. West Asia or the Middle East continues to present hotspots. Maritime security and safety is another domain of shared concern. We both have a common interest in ASEAN centrality and ASEAN-driven platforms.
On the similar lines in the future?
Well, as 400 deal doesn't have only symbolic meaning, it has very important practical meaning for Indian defense capability. And the situation is basically underway. The deal is being implemented. We witness attempts on the part of the United States to undermine this cooperation and to make India obey the American orders, to follow the American vision of how this region should be developed. And our Indian friends clearly and firmly explain that they are a sovereign country, and they will decide on whose weapons to buy and who is going to be a partner of India in this and other areas. It is confirmed, and it was mentioned today as well, that the Russian-Indian relations have been characterized and remain specially privileged strategic partnership. And certainly the meeting of the Military Technical and Military Commission and Defense Cooperation Commission, which took place this morning parallel with my bilateral meeting with Minister Jaishankar, is manifestation that this cooperation is in the interest of both countries.
After wrapping up the commitments in India, the Russian president will fly back to Moscow to prepare for an all-important virtual summit with the President of the United States, Joe Biden. The presidents of America and Russia are set to discuss a range of issues, but Ukraine is likely to dominate their talks. The exact timing of the call has not yet been disclosed. We know it's going to take place at some point on Tuesday. The conversation comes at an absolutely crucial time of deteriorating ties between the two countries. Here's a preview.
U.S. President Joe Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin will hold a video call Tuesday to deal with military tensions over Ukraine, as well as other topics. Biden spoke to reporters Friday before a weekend trip to Camp David.
We were aware of Russia for a long time, and my expectation is you're going to have a long discussion.
According to a U.S. source on Saturday, Biden wants to discuss U.S. concerns about Russia's military buildup on the Ukraine border, as well as strategic stability, cyber, and regional issues. The Kremlin said the two will also talk about bilateral ties and the implementation of agreements reached at their Geneva summit in June. More than 94,000 Russian troops are massed near Ukraine's borders. The Ukraine Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov said on Friday that Moscow may be planning a large-scale military offensive by the end of January, citing intelligence reports. Biden on Friday said he and his advisors are preparing a comprehensive set of initiatives aimed at deterring Putin from an invasion. He did not give further details, but the Biden administration has discussed partnering with European allies to impose more sanctions on Russia. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken told the Reuters Next Summit that Biden was determined to stand against any aggression against an ally.
And also to defend the territorial integrity, the sovereignty, the independence of Ukraine.
The exact timing of the call between Biden and Putin was not disclosed.
So for more about this upcoming virtual summit meeting between President Putin, I am joined live by WION's correspondent in New York, Susan Tehrani, who's been tracking that story for us. Susan, the Kremlin says ties between the United States and Russia are lamentable. How does the White House view them?
So the White House says that basically no one can put any red lines for the United States. That's what President Biden said before going into the weekend. And what he was referring to was President Putin's comments, rejecting President Putin's comments that he requested guarantee for security in the region. But also, you know, it's interesting that it's not just the White House, but this is an issue, a security issue that both Republicans and Democrats States are on the same page on, and they hope that President Biden will send a clear and tough message to the Kremlin and President Putin when they do have this video call on Tuesday, and that's that you know, invading Ukraine is off the table, and the United States stands in alliance with Ukraine. Next week, after this call, this coming week, we are going to see a set of meetings in Congress that perhaps is going to also provide more support for Ukraine. We saw those comments being made by Democratic Senator Chris Murphy, as well as Senator Ernst, who is also a Republican. So I think Biden's challenge going into this meeting is going to be really not only putting into strong words, but putting into action the strong words that he's putting forth. And I think, you know, the challenge will be not only... I'm sorry, I'm getting a playback. His challenges are not only going to be the words that he's putting forward, but putting those words into action moving forward and demonstrating to President Putin that he's very serious about this possible invasion.
Susan, the issue of trust here is going to be absolutely pivotal, isn't it? Because from Washington's perspective, and indeed from the perspective of the wider world, the nightmare scenario must be that President Putin decides to test Joe Biden, maybe not by engaging in a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, but at least by allowing some of his forces to drift over into Ukrainian territory. I mean, it's a tinderbox, this issue, and one that would create an end-of-the-year nightmare for Joe Biden, who would then have to decide how to respond.
Absolutely. You know, that's the issue, Simon. If we think that Joe Biden is facing challenges here at home, internationally, that's another story. It's this story of credibility and whether or not international leaders and adversaries take Biden seriously, from China, Iran to Russia. And we have this issue of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline that many behind closed door on Capitol Hill are concerned about. They think that the fact that the Biden administration wasn't able to be tougher on Russia because of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline deal with Germany sort of gave a green light to Vladimir Putin to, you know, not take President Biden very seriously and sort of push his buttons on the one hand, and on the second hand, the withdrawal of Afghanistan might have played a role as well. So yes, the Biden administration and the President Biden himself will have to really hone in and, again, you know, be very clear cut on where the red lines are and what actions beyond sanctions, perhaps, the United States is willing to take if Putin decides to, as you mentioned, take any action at this point.
And Susan, very briefly, later in the week, President Biden is hosting his summit of democracies, 110 countries participating virtually in that. I mean, the sequencing of all this seems to be pretty interesting, right? The conversation with Vladimir Putin on Tuesday, then the Summit for Democracy on Thursday.
Absolutely, absolutely. And let's not forget that this all comes at a time when tensions are also very high with China as well. We have reports that Taiwan's president is also expected, Taiwanese leaders are expected to take part in this summit of democracies. But it's very interesting that not only Biden himself sending a message, you know, in a very Biden kind of and the Democrats kind of foreign policy initiative, you know, bringing diplomacy in the forefront on the one hand with summits and whatnot, but also, you know, trying to hone in on bilateral bilateral meetings as well with these leaders. But at the end of the day, we really have to see whether or not, again, these actions meet, the words really meet the actions. Many want to see, the Biden administration really take stronger actions, perhaps maybe even pull Russia out of the SWIFT banking system, measures like that are very shocking and bring a shock to countries like Russia. But we'll have to wait and see how far Biden is willing to go with Putin, and whether or not, the aftershock will not be something that both sides might regret at the end of the day.
It's going to be a very interesting week, and it's only Monday. Susan Tehrani battling a noisy New York City Monday morning rush hour there and joining us live from Manhattan. Thanks so much for that. This then the beginning of what is going to be a pivotal week on the world stage, and it's all kicked off with that visit to Delhi by Russian President Vladimir Putin meeting Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. That is the Monday edition of WION Live broadcast from Washington. I'll see you again tomorrow at exactly the same time for the Tuesday edition. Stay with WION. World is one.
There are many other...